"Security, remove her. She doesn't belong in a place like this." The command split the air like glass shattering on marble. Conversations died mid-sentence. A waiter froze with a tray of champagne, eyes darting nervously. The chandeliers glowed steady, but in the silence, they felt like spotlights exposing every flaw. The voice came from the woman in crimson. Her dress was sharp, short, and cut to demand attention, the silk clinging like a second skin. She radiated the kind of confidence born not of labor, but of being watched, admired, envied. Everyone in the room knew her, the Mogul's wife, the jewel on his arm, dazzling and untouchable. Her gaze, however, was fixed on a figure the crowd had barely noticed until now, a woman in orange. The shade wasn't flashy, yet it glowed against her skin with quiet defiance. Her dress was precise, tailored to move without noise, its strength in simplicity. No sparkling necklace screamed for attention, no glitter betrayed her intent. Her presence alone drew the eye, steady as a flame that refused to flicker. She walked with a measured pace, her posture unbroken, as though the floor itself adjusted to her steps. Her hair was pulled back in a way that revealed her face fully, nothing to hide, nothing to prove. In a sea of noise, she was composed silence, and that was enough to provoke the woman in red. "Really?" the Mogul's wife scoffed, voice carrying with the ease of someone used to commanding the room. "A skyscraper worth billions, and someone dressed like that dares to walk in?" Murmurs rippled through the guests. A few chuckled, unwilling to be left out of her performance. Phones rose discreetly, capturing the exchange. A young reporter whispered, "She doesn't look out of place. She looks like she belongs." But the wife wasn't done. She tilted her glass, savoring the cruelty in her tone. "Orange? How bold. Perhaps fitting, if you were a traffic cone directing cars outside." A small circle of guests stifled their laughter, their smiles sharpened by embarrassment. The insult echoed anyway, bouncing off marble and glass. The woman in orange didn't react. Not a blink, not a breath wasted. Her stillness wasn't submission, it was weight. The kind of gravity that pulled the air tighter, forced people to notice without knowing why. She had heard such words before in classrooms, in boardrooms, at charity dinners. Each time, the same tone, the same dismissal. Tonight, it was dressed in designer silk and served with champagne. But she remained steady, rooted. The silence stretching from her became unbearable. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her, the woman in orange. She didn't need to strike back with words. Her composure was the strike, her restraint, the storm building. And though no one knew her name yet, the crowd felt this was not the humiliation of a stranger. It was the prelude to something far more powerful. The laughter lingered, but the woman in orange did not break stride. Her heels touched marble with a rhythm that was neither hurried nor hesitant. She moved as though she had walked through rooms like this 1,000 times, and yet carried the air of someone who had no interest in being noticed. She had arrived without a parade of assistants, without a stylist fussing at her hem, without the usual orbit of sycophants. No designer logos announced her worth, no jewelry flashed like a billboard of wealth. In a crowd where every guest competed to shimmer, she chose to stand like stone, unpolished, undeniable. Her invitation, still folded neatly in her hand, bore the embossed seal of the tower's developers. It was enough to open any door, but when the Mogul's wife sneered, even that seal seemed invisible. The crowd was a gallery of excess, tuxedos stitched in Milan, gowns custom, dyed to match the champagne bubbles, shoes that cost more than a month's rent in the city below. The conversations were rehearsed, a competition of numbers, profits, deals, investments, inheritances. Every gesture was a performance. And then there was her. The orange dress did not compete, it claimed. She had chosen the color with care. Not black, which would have blended in. Not gold, which would have screamed for approval. Orange bold, alive, the color of fire at dusk. A color that dared to say, "I am not here to fade into your shadow." But to the Mogul's wife, that choice was an insult in itself. From her vantage point at the center of the hall, the wife looked down on the woman in orange as though she were a disruption to the perfect photograph of wealth. To her, the skyscraper's opening ceremony was a coronation of her family's empire, and no empire tolerates an intruder. She gestured again to the guards, her voice louder now. "Check her credentials, quickly." The guards hesitated, not because they doubted the wife's authority, but because of the calm in the woman's eyes. She didn't fidget, she didn't explain. She simply extended the sealed envelope forward, steady, as if to say, "Everything you need is here, and still, you will question me." The silence pressed tighter. Guests craned their necks. Phones captured the frozen tableau, red dress versus orange, accusation versus composure. The woman in orange allowed herself a small breath. She had walked into hundreds of rooms like this, rooms where her presence was measured against her skin before her words could be heard, rooms where she had to prove again and again that her place was not borrowed, not stolen, not begged for. And tonight, she let them believe whatever they wished, because she knew something they didn't. This hall, this tower, this entire empire, none of it could exist without her. But for now, she remained silent, letting the weight of their prejudice build higher, brick upon brick. A skyscraper of arrogance waiting to fall. The envelope was still in her hand, thick, embossed, undeniable. It should have been enough to silence the whispers. But the Mogul's wife wasn't interested in proof. She wanted spectacle. She circled slowly, her crimson dress flashing under the chandeliers like a flame in motion. With every step, she raised her voice just enough for the nearest circle of guests to catch her words. And once heard, they spread like perfume, sweet for some, suffocating for others. "Tell me," she purred, gesturing with her glass, "who let her in?" A few chuckles bubbled up. A man in a velvet jacket leaned toward his companion and muttered, "Probably some social climber with a borrowed pass." His date laughed too loudly, eager to align herself with the crowd. The wife smirked, feeding on their agreement. "I mean, really," she continued, her tone rising as if she were speaking on stage. "A skyscraper of this scale, this grandeur, this future-defining symbol of our city, and someone dressed like that believes she belongs here?" The laughter sharpened, no longer muffled. Guests turned openly now, some out of cruelty, some out of curiosity, all caught in the gravity of the humiliation. A server passing by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres slowed, unsure whether to keep walking or vanish behind the curtains. The woman in orange remained still, her breath calm, her gaze unwavering. But the wife wasn't finished. She leaned closer, her words slicing like a blade disguised as silk. "Do you even know where you are, sweetheart? This isn't a charity banquet. This isn't a mall opening. This is history. And you're just a distraction in orange fabric." A ripple of gasps mixed with the laughter. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances. A few even shifted their weight, as though questioning whether they should stand with her or against her. The wife, however, sensed no danger. She mistook silence for victory. She raised her glass high, her grin wide, and declared, "Security! I said remove her." Two guards moved uncertainly, their steps hesitant. Something about the woman in orange unsettled them. Her stillness wasn't fear, it was weight. Authority. Like stepping too close to a statue carved from stone, you hesitate before laying hands on it. The crowd buzzed, voices layering into a chorus of mockery. "Check her papers. Probably a mistake. She's brave, I'll give her that. No, she's foolish." Phones kept rolling. A live-stream chat filled with comments. "Who is she? Why are they doing this? She doesn't look lost." And yet, in the center of it all, the woman in orange neither defended herself nor explained. Her silence pressed harder than the wife's insults, like gravity bending the room. For a moment, it seemed as though the walls themselves leaned inward, waiting for the breaking point. The guards hesitated at the edge of the marble floor. Their orders were clear, but something about the woman in orange made their steps falter. She didn't plead. She didn't move back. She simply stood, one hand resting lightly on the envelope, the other at her side, posture rooted as if the ground itself had chosen her. The wife tilted her chin higher, irritation bleeding into her voice. "What are you waiting for?" I said. "Remove her." Her words cracked like a whip, but the impact fell dull. The crowd waited for the woman in orange to falter, to protest, to explain herself. But she offered nothing. Her silence was deliberate. It stretched through the room like a slow tide, washing over the polished marble, seeping into the corners. Even the laughter stumbled, unsure of its own echo. A few guests lowered their phones, suddenly uncomfortable capturing a moment that no longer felt like a joke. The quartet, still poised in uncertainty, let their bows hover above strings. The air was taut, suspended, and in that silence, her presence grew. Her eyes were steady, unflinching. They did not rise in defiance nor drop in submission. They simply existed, calm as stone, unyielding as steel. A woman who had been tested too many times to react to yet another trial. She remembered boardrooms where men twice her age told her she was too ambitious. She remembered negotiations where partners assumed she was an assistant, not the one signing the contracts. She remembered dinners where introductions skipped over her name, as though she were furniture. The tone never changed, only the setting. Tonight, it came wrapped in red silk, dripping from the lips of a Mogul's wife. And still she gave it nothing. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The silence pressed on them, heavier with every second. The smug curve of the wife's smile began to twitch, unsettled by the refusal of her target to play the part assigned to her. Humiliation required reaction. Without it, the scene was incomplete. The guards exchanged glances, uncertain whether to act without clear justification. One muttered under his breath, "She doesn't look out of place." The other, jaw clenched, kept his eyes on the envelope she held. Still, she did not move. Her breath was even, her stance unshaken. Her silence was not absence, it was pressure, invisible, yet undeniable. The wife laughed louder, trying to fill the void. "Well, cat got your tongue?" Her voice rang, but it sounded thinner now, brittle. The woman in orange blinked once, slowly. A blink that said more than any retort could. A blink that carried years of practice, absorbing insult, holding ground, letting others expose themselves with their own venom. And the crowd felt it, the power in stillness, the strength in restraint. The humiliation had reversed. It was no longer hers. The silence should have ended the scene. In most rooms, it would have. An insult, a smirk, a target forced to walk away. But here, under the chandelier glow and the watchful spire of the tower itself, silence only magnified the moment. And the cameras caught it. At the edge of the hall, a young reporter clutched his phone tighter, his live stream already running. He hadn't meant to film this. He'd come for wide shots of champagne glasses, speeches, polite interviews with donors. Instead, his lens now captured the red dress, the orange dress, and the storm between them. His audience grew by the second. "Who is she?" flashed across the chat. "Why are they laughing at her? That woman in orange doesn't look scared, she looks powerful." Dozens of emojis flooded the screen, angry faces, fire, raised fists. Another guest, unaware of the live stream, whispered too close to the microphone. "I think she's important. You can't just treat her like that." The comment exploded online. "Even the people there know." The wife, of course, saw none of it. She believed the room belonged to her. She believed humiliation was private theater. But humiliation, once recorded, is no longer private. It becomes evidence. Click. Another camera flash. A photographer from a business magazine leaned in, capturing every angle. Not the gowns, not the speeches, but the frozen clash. The red silk leaning forward, the orange dress standing firm, the guards trapped in hesitation. By the hors d'oeuvre table, two waiters exchanged glances. One muttered, "She hasn't moved. Not once." The other shook his head. "That's not fear. That's something else." Their words, though quiet, joined the hum of the hall, and the hum joined the live stream, and soon the narrative shifted. The wife tried to laugh again, but it rang hollow. She raised her voice higher, desperate to regain control. "This is ridiculous. Do I really have to explain to everyone why she doesn't belong here?" The crowd didn't laugh this time. They hesitated. A pause long enough for the reporter's chat to seize the moment. They're realizing it. Look at the faces in the background. Tables are turning. The woman in orange remained still, but her silence no longer stood alone. It was echoed now, multiplied, carried on the screens of strangers across the city. The power of a room can shift in an instant, sometimes with shouting, sometimes with applause, and sometimes with the simple decision of one person to remain unshaken while the world watches. The Mogul's wife didn't yet understand, but everyone else could feel it. Something irreversible had begun. The Mogul's wife was not accustomed to resistance. Silence unnerved her. Indifference mocked her more than any retort could. And so, she reached for the one tool guaranteed to reclaim attention, the microphone. She tapped it once. Thump. The sound carried across the marble hall, drawing every eye toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone honeyed but sharp at the edges, "before we proceed with tonight's celebration, it seems we have a situation." The crowd shifted. Glasses clinked nervously. Cameras tilted toward her, and toward the woman in orange who still stood, serene, by the center aisle. The wife gestured with a casual flick of her hand. "It appears someone has wandered into our grand opening. An unfortunate mix-up, I'm sure. Security is handling it." A polite laugh ran through the hall, but it was thinner this time, uncertain. Some guests smiled only because they thought they should. The wife leaned in, her smile widening. "You know, I admire the courage it must take to walk into a billion-dollar tower dressed as though you were headed to, what shall we say, a neighborhood brunch." Her voice rang out, magnified, impossible to ignore. The insult echoed against the glass walls, bounced from marble to marble, and landed squarely on the woman in orange. The crowd stirred. Some gasped, some smirked, some whispered. The young reporter's live-stream chat exploded. "She said that into the mic? This is public humiliation." Orange Lady isn't even flinching. But the wife pressed harder. She thrived on spectacle, and now she had her stage. "I mean, look at her," she said, raising her glass high for emphasis. "Orange, bold, yes, but perhaps more suited for safety vests or traffic cones, wouldn't you all agree?" This time, the laughter wasn't nervous. It was sharp. It cut. A ripple of chuckles spread across the hall, bouncing like a cruel wave, fed by those too afraid to stand apart. The woman in orange remained motionless. Her stillness was no longer just silence. It was defiance carved in stone. She met no one's gaze, yet she seemed to see everything, the smirks, the pity, the unease. The guards froze mid-step, unwilling to touch her without orders more direct. The weight of the moment pressed against their shoulders. The wife, sensing their hesitation, sneered into the microphone. "What are you waiting for? Escort her out, quickly, before she embarrasses herself further." But embarrassment did not belong to the woman in orange. Not anymore. It clung instead to the wife's laughter, forced and brittle, to the guests whose smiles trembled at the edges, to the cameras that caught every flicker of cruelty and streamed it beyond the marble walls. The hall, once a theater of celebration, had become a courtroom, and though the wife stood with the microphone, the power in the room was shifting silently, invisibly toward the figure in orange, who had not spoken a single word. The laughter hadn't faded when the wife descended from the stage. Her heels struck marble like gunfire, each step a declaration of ownership. The microphone dangled in her hand, but her voice carried loud enough without it. She closed the distance between herself and the woman in orange, circling her as though she were inspecting an intruder in her kingdom. The crowd leaned in, eager for drama, hungry for spectacle, and then her eyes found the envelope, that embossed seal, crisp against the woman's palm, proof of belonging, a key that no insult could erase. The wife's smile sharpened. So that's your trick," she sneered, reaching forward with manicured fingers. "A borrowed invitation. How quaint." The guards tensed but did not move. Cameras lifted higher. Before anyone could stop her, she snatched the envelope from the woman's hand. Gasps rippled across the hall, echoing like broken glass. The woman in orange did not resist. Her hand remained steady at her side, as though the gesture had been anticipated. The wife held the envelope high, displaying it to the crowd like evidence. "You see?" she announced, her voice dripping with triumph. "This is what desperation looks like, pretending to belong, waving paper as if it makes you someone." And with a theatrical flick of her wrist, rip-a-pa. The sound tore through the hall. Paper shredded between her fingers, pieces fluttering to the marble floor like ashes. The crowd gasped again. Some applauded nervously, unsure whether cruelty disguised as confidence was still entertainment. Others turned away, uneasy, sensing the line had been crossed. The live-stream chat erupted. "She destroyed her invite? That's illegal." Orange Lady hasn't even blinked. The woman in orange remained still. Her eyes lowered briefly to the scraps at her feet, then lifted again, calm, unbroken. The silence around her thickened, heavier than the insult itself. The wife laughed, high and brittle, basking in her own audacity. "There," she said, tossing the last fragment to the ground. "Problem solved. Now security. Remove her before she embarrasses us all further." but no one moved. The guards shifted uncomfortably. Guests fidgeted with their glasses. The reporter's camera zoomed in, capturing every fluttering scrap of paper on the polished marble. The woman in orange stood as though rooted in stone, unshaken by the violence of paper and pride. Her silence no longer felt like endurance. It felt like judgment. The wife, still grinning, failed to see what the others now sensed. This was no longer humiliation. It was the prelude to reckoning. The scraps of paper still drifted on the marble floor when a new sound cut through the silence. Enough. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. But it carried clear, steady, and impossible to ignore. The crowd turned. A man in a tailored gray suit stepped forward, his press badge glinting under the chandeliers. Young, not yet seasoned by cynicism, his face was flushed with conviction. He had been holding his camera low, recording everything, but now his voice was louder than his lens. "She had an invitation," he said firmly. "We all saw it. You tore it up. That doesn't erase the truth." Murmurs rippled. A few guests shifted, embarrassed, caught between complicity and conscience. The Mogul's wife froze mid-laugh, her smile stiffening. "Excuse me?" she hissed, the microphone still in her hand. "Who do you think you are?" The reporter didn't retreat. His camera now rose to chest level, recording openly. "I'm someone who believes evidence matters, and I have it on tape." The crowd stirred, phones tilted higher. Suddenly, the balance wavered. This was no longer private theater. It was testimony. Another voice chimed in, hesitant but brave, an older woman in a navy gown, pearls glinting faintly at her throat. "He's right. I saw the seal myself. That envelope was genuine." Gasps swept the hall. A ripple of discomfort spread through those who had laughed moments before. The wife's face tightened, a flash of panic sparking behind her eyes before she masked it with scorn. "Please," she sneered, "do not lecture me about what belongs in my husband's tower. But the silence that followed wasn't agreement. It was fracture. Some guests looked at their shoes. Others glanced at the woman in orange, their expressions shifting curiosity, replacing mockery, unease replacing amusement. The live stream chat surged. Finally, someone spoke up. "That reporter is a hero." Red dress lady looks nervous now. The woman in orange hadn't moved. Her stillness had summoned the first voice. Her composure had given others permission to speak. And now, the wife's stage was cracking beneath her heels. The reporter held her gaze, unwavering. "You tried to erase her presence with paper, but you can't erase the truth, and now the world is watching." The words landed harder than any insult she had thrown. For the first time that night, the wife faltered, her laughter gone, her grip on the microphone tightening as though it might slip. The woman in orange remained silent, but the silence no longer stood alone. It was joined now by witnesses, by cameras, by a rising tide of doubt, and in that hall of marble and glass, the balance shifted. One voice had broken the spell. The hall was restless now. The spell of laughter had cracked. The stage no longer belonged to the wife in red. Eyes that once followed her gestures now turned, slowly, inevitably, toward the woman in orange. And at last, she moved, not hurried, not defensive, simply deliberate. She bent down, fingers brushing the marble where fragments of her envelope lay scattered. She gathered one piece, folded it gently, and set it on the nearest cocktail table as though it were evidence not of loss, but of disrespect. Then she straightened, her gaze sweeping once across the room, calm, steady. Her silence broke, not with volume, but with weight. "You tore paper," she said softly, her voice resonant in the stunned quiet. "But you cannot tear ownership." The words hung heavy. The Mogul's wife blinked, startled. "Excuse me?" The woman in orange took one step forward. Her heels clicked against marble, a sound sharper than the microphone's static. "This tower you celebrate tonight," she continued, "is built on funding, on signatures, on partnerships." Murmurs swelled. Guests leaned closer, her eyes fixed on the wife, unwavering. "And some of us did not borrow invitations to enter this hall. Some of us signed the checks that made it possible to exist." Gasps erupted. The live stream chat went wild. "Wait, what?" "She's a backer? Orange lady is the money." The wife's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, closed, then twisted into disbelief. What are you implying?" The woman in orange did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I am not here to watch your tower rise," she said. "I am one of the reasons it stands at all." A murmur rolled through the crowd, heavier this time. Some clutched their glasses tighter. Others whispered names, numbers, connections. The young reporter's lens caught every flicker of shock, every jaw tightening in recognition. The woman in orange let the silence reclaim the hall. Then, with precision, she delivered the final stone. You wanted me removed, but without me, there is no opening ceremony. Without me, there is no tower. The room froze. The wife staggered half a step back, her hand still clutching the microphone as though it might anchor her. But no sound came. Her laughter was gone, her stage shattered. The woman in orange lowered her gaze briefly, then looked out at the guests, not as a stranger, not as an intruder, but as a sovereign surveying what she already owned. For the first time that night, the hall recognized her. Not the dress, not the silence, her, and recognition carried more power than any microphone. For a moment, the words hung suspended in the air, too heavy for the room to process. Without me, there is no tower. Then the silence cracked. Gasps rippled through the hall like aftershocks. Guests who had been laughing minutes earlier now pressed closer, whispering furiously into each other's ears. Names were spoken, numbers, rumors of billion-dollar funds, of international partnerships, of unseen backers who had made this skyscraper possible. And now one of them was standing before them. Phones tilted higher. Cameras zoomed closer. The young reporter's live stream surged, his chat scrolling so fast it blurred. She funded the tower? This is bigger than we thought. Orange Queen just flipped the script. The wife looked shook. The wife was shaken. Her crimson smile faltered, the microphone trembling slightly in her hand. She tried to laugh, but the sound scraped thin. What nonsense is this? She stammered, her eyes darting toward the guards, toward the crowd, anywhere but at the woman in orange. But the crowd was no longer with her. The older woman in pearls spoke again, louder this time. I told you, that invitation was real. She belongs here. Another voice joined from the back, a man in a navy suit with silver at his temples. More than belongs, he said. If she's telling the truth, and I suspect she is, then half of us owe tonight's champagne to her name. The murmurs swelled into a current, turning against the wife in red. Faces shifted from amusement to shame, from complicity to awe. The laughter that once carried her was gone, replaced by a rising tide of recognition that she could not control. And through it all, the woman in orange stood calm, her presence unshaken. She did not smile, did not gloat. She simply allowed the truth to speak for her. The live stream chat exploded again. This is history. Respect. She kept quiet until the perfect moment. Power doesn't shout, power waits. The guards, who had hovered uncertainly for so long, now stepped back, their eyes lowered. They had no orders they could justify anymore. To touch her would be to touch the tower itself. The wife's composure cracked further. You think this changes anything? She sputtered, her voice straining. This is my husband's project, his empire, not yours. But even as she spoke, she heard the whispers she couldn't silence. Funding, ownership, equity stakes, signatures. The empire she invoked no longer felt like hers. It felt like it belonged to the woman she had tried to erase. The wife's laughter died in her throat. The cameras stayed fixed on her trembling hand, the microphone shaking slightly, as though even the steel frame could sense the shift. And in the center of the marble hall, the woman in orange remained unshaken, the still point around which the entire room had turned. The hall was no longer hers. Not the wife in red, not the crowd, not even the mogul whose name glittered on the invitations. It belonged now to the woman in orange. She let the silence hold a moment longer, every camera fixed, every whisper caught in its own echo. Then, with a calmness that felt almost impossible, she reached into her clutch. A single leather folder emerged, understated, sleek, the kind of object most guests would have overlooked. But as she opened it, sliding one document free, the air in the room tightened again. She held it gently, as though it weighed nothing, and yet everyone could feel its gravity. This, she said, her voice low but carrying, is the transfer authorization. As of tonight, $8.3 billion will no longer support this tower. Gasps detonated. Glasses clinked against marble as hands trembled. The wife staggered a step back. You can't. But the woman in orange continued, unshaken. 8.3 billion. My funding, my equity, my signature. Withdrawn. The live stream chat erupted like fireworks. 8.3B? She owns the tower? Red dress lady just lost everything. Habiltan. She lowered the paper slowly, deliberately. Without that money, this skyscraper is not an empire. It is a shell of steel and glass. And without me, your celebration ends here. The crowd broke into chaos, some gasping, some applauding, some frozen in disbelief. A banker near the stage pressed his hand to his forehead, whispering, "She's pulling the lifeline." Another guest muttered, 8 billion, gone. And still, she stood steady, her gaze lifted, sweeping across the room, landing last on the Mogul's wife. You thought you could erase me with laughter, with paper, with arrogance. Her tone sharpened, precise as a blade. But I do not ask to belong. I decide what belongs. The wife's face drained, her hand trembling around the useless microphone. For the first time all night, she had nothing to say. The woman in orange closed the folder, tucking it back into her clutch with finality. As of this moment, the tower returns to me. My investment, my name, my decision. The crowd gasped once more, a wave of awe this time, not cruelty. The live stream chat flooded with fire emojis, crowns, raised fists, and in the silence that followed, it was no longer the Mogul's wife who stood at the center of attention. It was the woman she had mocked, belittled, dismissed. The black CEO, her presence filled the hall, undeniable, unshakable. The skyscraper above them no longer gleamed as the Mogul's triumph. It gleamed as her reclamation. The reckoning was complete. The hall had collapsed into a storm of whispers. Deals unraveled mid-sentence. Glasses sat untouched. Guests scrolled their phones in disbelief as headlines spread faster than the champagne had been poured. But at the center of it all, she was still. The woman in orange did not celebrate, did not gloat. She closed her clutch, placed one hand lightly against her hip, and turned toward the grand staircase. Every eye followed. The guards who had once been ordered to remove her now stepped aside, their heads bowed in quiet acknowledgement. The photographer lowered his camera, realizing the story had already told itself. Even the quartet, who had not played a single note since the first insult, watched her as though waiting for a cue. The Mogul's wife stood frozen, microphone slack in her hand, her red dress suddenly less like fire and more like ashes. The smile that had begun the evening was gone. What remained was silence, the same silence she had mocked, now turned against her. The woman in orange walked slowly, each step measured, unhurried. Her heels touched marble like punctuation marks, final and absolute. And with every step, the message crystallized. Power does not shout. It does not need validation, or laughter, or microphones. Real power waits, observes, endures, and when the moment comes, it speaks once, and the world rearranges itself around that truth. The live stream chat was still exploding. Orange Queen, this is what dignity looks like. Justice without a single scream. I'll never forget this. At the doorway, she paused. The chandelier light caught the orange fabric, and for a moment it looked like flame steady, alive, unextinguishable. She turned her head slightly, just enough for the crowd to see her profile. Not a smile, not a glare, only calm recognition. Then she stepped through the doors into the night air, leaving the hall in stunned silence. Behind her, the skyscraper loomed, its glass edges cutting into the sky, but it no longer belonged to the Mogul's empire. It belonged to her, the woman they had tried to erase, the one who had chosen dignity over spectacle, composure over chaos. Justice had not shouted. It had simply walked out the door in an orange dress, and the world would remember.